Welcome to the Appalachian Historical Review. This is the audio home for AppalachianGenealogy.com. Each week, we dig into the records, migration paths, and the real stories of the people who settled the Appalachian Range. We're here to look at the actual documents and the everyday lives that define our heritage. Now, let's step into the records and look at what the documents themselves reveal.
Imagine just, vanishing for 14 years. Completely off the grid.
Right. Just totally gone.
Yeah, and then you only resurface because you desperately need, a good character reference from the exact same community you abandoned.
It sounds like a movie plot.
It really does. But back in 1853, that is exactly what a woman named Anne Whittier did. She left her husband, just disappeared from her town in New York, and nobody had any idea if she was dead or alive.
Wow.
And then, out of nowhere, a letter arrives from Massachusetts. She's trying to start this completely new life, and to do that, she needs the social blessing of the very people she walked out on over a decade earlier.
It's such a stunning story, and I think it completely shatters the standard image of what we think of as genealogy.
Right, totally.
Because, most people picture these dusty birth certificates or fading federal census forms, or maybe like a ship manifest with a giant government seal on it.
Yeah, we tend to assume that history is always officially sanctioned, right? Neatly tracked in these massive bureaucratic filing cabinets.
Exactly. We look for the big institutional footprints. But today's deep dive is going to look in literally the absolute last place you'd ever expect to find this stuff.
We have this really fascinating stack of sources today that prove the most vivid, dramatic, and honestly surprisingly reliable trails of our ancestors are hidden in, of all places, the scribbled administrative meeting minutes of local churches.
It's amazing. These local ledgers just provide a completely different lens on the past. They strip away the formality of, say, government census, and they just give you the raw, unvarnished reality of everyday survival.
So to give you listening an idea of the scope we're looking at today, we are pulling from the archival guidelines of the Southern Baptist Historical Library a massive trove of 1860s receipts and letters from the Fredonia Baptist Church in New York.
And we also have this deeply isolated research on Appalachian group migration, plus early 20th century African-American church minutes from Jim Crow era North Carolina.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is to synthesize all of these seemingly, mundane administrative records. We're going to explore how they actually functioned as historical passports, ideological blueprints, and these incredibly dramatic windows into how people govern themselves when the federal government basically couldn't.
Yeah, because whether you're trying to track down your own family tree or you just want to understand how society functioned 150 years ago, you are about to see how a petty dispute over a $5 gas bill,
which is wild.
It is,
yeah.
Or, an intense theological debate about the afterlife, how those things are actually the ultimate key to understanding history.
It's the exact point where the macro history of this expanding nation collides with the microhistory of a single neighborhood.
Precisely.
So let's start with a massive reality check. Because if you're trying to track down a 19th century ancestor, say, a Baptist living in the 1800s, your obvious first instinct is to go straight to the top of the organizational chart.
Oh, absolutely.
You'd think, okay, there has to be a master ledger at the national headquarters, right? Like a giant database of everyone who was ever a member. But looking at the Southern Baptist Historical Library and Archives guidelines, it's a complete black hole.
It really is. And they are brutally upfront about this, too. The archives explicitly warn patrons, before they even begin a search, that they do not possess lists of individual Baptists.
Not at all.
None. There's no national membership list. There's no state membership list. There isn't even a county-level database.
That is so counterintuitive because birth, baptism, marriage, death records, those are the very foundation of genealogical research. And they are completely absent from these denominational files.
Completely. If you don't already know the specific hyperlocal church your ancestor attended, the archive actually charges you a $20 search fee, and they guarantee you will get absolutely nothing back.
Wait, they charge you $20 to tell you they don't have anything?
Yeah. Unless your ancestor was like a highly prominent national leader or a foreign missionary, their name simply didn't register at the top.
Wow.
The bureaucratic structure of these denominations was entirely decentralized by design. The national body didn't track everyday folks because their theology and governance were fiercely local. The individual congregation was the final authority. period.
Okay, so it's basically like trying to find a mid-level accountant's daily attendance record by walking into the United Nations.
That is a great analogy.
Instead of just, going to their local branch office down the street.
Right, that perfectly captures the structural disconnect. The top level only cares about macro policy, while the local level handles the actual day-to-day human beings.
Which means if the National Archives aren't tracking the major life milestones, what exactly are the local churches tracking to maintain order in their communities?
Well, they were mainly tracking two things: movement and moral standing.
Okay.
You have to remember, America in the 1860s was expanding westward at a breakneck pace. You had a highly transient population. So to govern that kind of chaotic human movement, local churches relied on this mechanism called a letter of dismission.
A letter of dismission. So without modern credit scores or digital background checks or even, reliable police records, these letters were essentially the only way to prove you weren't some grifter skipping town to escape a bad debt.
Precisely. You couldn't just show up in a frontier town, walk into a bank or a general store, and just expect to be trusted. A letter of dismission was basically a letter of credit for your moral and social character.
Oh, that makes sense.
You requested it from your home church, and they would officially vote, like a formal committee vote, on whether you were leaving in good and regular standing.
And the sources from the Fredonia Baptist Church in New York show exactly how this played out in the 1860s. I was reading through this, and there's a record for a woman named Helen Stevens. She embarks on this grueling move from New York all the way to Dubuque, Iowa in 1860.
Which is a massive journey back then.
Right. And the Iowa church actually writes back to Fredonia to confirm the transfer. Then you have William Taylor, who returns from Missouri in 1861, and he has to present his letter just to be reaccepted into his old New York community.
Exactly. And this specific type of record bridges the massive gaps left by the federal government.
How so?
Well, think about the U.S. Census. It only happens once every 10 years. In the 19th century, an entire family could move 3 times, suffer total financial ruin, and rebuild in a completely different state in the span of a single decade.
And the federal government would have absolutely zero record of it.
None. They just pop up in a new state 10 years later.
Hold on, though. The U.S. government conducts a massive federal census, backed by the power and funding of Washington, D.C. Are you seriously telling me a handwritten note from a local pastor in 1865 is a more accurate tracking tool than the federal government?
In many regions, without a doubt.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The Appalachian migration sources illustrate this beautifully. Official county and state borders were constantly shifting during this era. New counties were constantly being carved out of old ones to accommodate the population growth.
Okay, I see where this is going.
So if you relied solely on government borders, it might look like a family migrated across 3 different counties over 20 years, when in reality, they never actually left their farm. The political borders just moved around them.
Oh, wow. But the church records completely ignored those political borders.
Exactly. They mapped the human landscape instead of the political one. People in these regions identified their locations by natural landmarks. They lived up on the creek or down the valley.
Right, right.
A church association often straddled state lines, just following the geography of major river systems. The church's network was just the most stable geographic and social locator available.
That makes the letter of dismission a sort of almost like a 19th century hybrid of a passport and a LinkedIn recommendation.
That's exactly what it was.
You literally could not successfully integrate into a new town's social or economic fabric without this piece of paper. You'd just be a total stranger without references.
And that immense power to grant or withhold a letter meant the local church committee had profound leverage over everyday behavior.
Which brings us to the drama. Because this local authority didn't just govern geographic movement, it governed the really gritty and honestly deeply petty reality of daily survival.
Well, the drama is the best part.
When you read the actual minutes from the Fredonia Baptist Church, you are basically reading a 19th century group chat full of financial squabbles and intense neighborhood drama.
Yeah. The administrative routine just captures the texture of life that textbooks always seem to miss.
The sheer minutia is incredible. There are literal itemized bills from the Fredonia Natural Gas Company. In April 1860, the church committee records a payment of exactly $5.70 to light the basement room.
Which was a decent amount of money back then.
Right. And then you have the pastoral salary struggles, which get incredibly tense. Reverend George D. Downey is a prime example of this friction.
Oh, Reverend Downey, yes.
He officially resigns in November 1864, and he does not sugarcoat a single thing. He explicitly writes to the congregation, entering it into the permanent record that he is quitting because the church is bitterly divided, and some members are flat out refusing to pay his salary.
Yeah, he essentially puts it in writing, I cannot work under these conditions, I'm out.
He weaponizes the administrative record to have the last word.
He absolutely does. And the disciplinary records go even deeper into this microdrama. The Elias Johnson situation is wild.
Oh, I wanted to talk about Elias. So this guy was excluded from the church, which is basically local excommunication back in 1850 over some vague disagreement about church measures.
Right, just some procedural disagreement.
And then 12 years later, in 1862, he writes this heartbreaking letter begging the church to rescind the exclusion and just give him a formal dismission letter so he can finally clear his name.
And what happens? The committee reviews his request after 12 years. And they deny it. They decide to leave the exclusion in place.
Which is so harsh. Because excommunication in an 1850s town isn't just about missing Sunday service. It is social and economic death. Businesses might refuse to extend you credit. Your neighbors might shun your family.
Exactly.
Elias carried that weight for over a decade. He needed that administrative letter just to breathe socially again, and they flatly denied him.
It just reinforces how tightly these communities control their boundaries.
Right.
Which, brings us back to Anne Whittier, the woman from the beginning who vanished for 14 years.
Right, the 14-year disappearance.
She leaves her husband abruptly in 1853. Disappears entirely. For over a decade, nobody in Fredonia has any idea where she is.
Nothing.
Then she writes from Lynn, Massachusetts, asking for a letter of dismission so she can be accepted into a new congregation. Even after successfully running away and living completely off the radar for 14 years, establishing a permanent, respectable life in Massachusetts required that social passport from her past.
The paperwork was inescapable.
Truly inescapable.
What I find so striking about this timeline, though, is the broader historical context. The gas bills, the salary disputes, Elias Johnson's drama, Anne Whittier, this is all playing out right in the middle of the American Civil War.
That is such a crucial point.
The country is literally tearing itself apart. Casualty lists from Gettysburg are hitting the newspapers, and these folks are aggressively debating a $5 gas bill for the basement.
Well, during massive macro-historical crises, people still have to live their micro lives,
Yeah, that makes sense.
The roof still leaks, the pastor still needs to eat, the local grievances don't just hit pause because there's a war. Maintaining this rigid administrative order, arguing over ledgers, and meeting minutes likely functioned as a vital psychological anchor.
Oh, I like that phrasing, a psychological anchor.
Because when the national news is entirely out of your control, balancing the local church budget provides this desperate semblance of normalcy and order.
Yeah, an anchor against the chaos of the outside world. But that intense need for local control and strict order didn't just cause interpersonal drama, though. The sources show that it literally tore entire congregations apart geographically.
We see this vividly in the Appalachian migration research. Church minutes track theological schisms that reshape the actual physical map of the region.
So let's look at the 1924 schism in the Washington District Association. This was a network of primitive Baptist churches deep in the mountains. They ended up splitting into two deeply opposed factions that the locals dubbed the Hellers and the No-Hellers.
Yes, the No-Hellers. They officially identify as primitive Baptist Universalists, and their theology is fascinating because it is such a radical departure from the norm.
How so?
They came to believe that Christ's atonement covers all of humanity. Everyone, past, present, and future, is ultimately saved.
Wait, primitive Baptists are historically, famously strict Calvinists.
Very strict.
They firmly believe in limited atonement, the idea that only a very specific group of the elect are saved and everyone else is doomed. How does a subgroup suddenly declare that everyone goes to heaven and still demand to keep the primitive Baptist label?
I mean, it required this massive, really creative theological pivot, right? The No-Hellers argue that hell absolutely exists, but only here on earth.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they believe it is the temporal punishment for sin during our mortal lives. Earth is essentially the penalty box. You pay for your sins while you are alive, experiencing hell on earth through suffering and hardship.
Okay.
But once the clock runs out and you die, the afterlife is completely egalitarian. Everyone goes to the victory party. The elect simply serve as God's witnesses during life to preserve earthly righteousness, not as exclusive ticket holders to heaven.
Wow. So because they preach there is no hell in the afterlife, the traditionalists slap them with the derisive nickname No-Hellers. And the traditionalists proudly embrace the title of Hellers. What's incredible is how this abstract theological debate literally repaints the map.
It really did. When a philosophical split of that magnitude hits a tight-knit mountain community, families divide. Often the breakaway faction literally packs up their wagons and migrates to a completely different holler or valley just to physically distance themselves and build their own meeting house.
And the sources note these no-Heller churches became highly isolated. They only exist in this tiny geographic pocket covering northeastern Tennessee, southwestern Virginia, Letcher County in Kentucky, and McDowell County in West Virginia.
The Stony Creek Church is a prime example of this isolation. If you are doing genealogical research in Appalachia and a family suddenly vanishes from the county tax rolls, looking at a government map won't help you at all.
You have to read the church association minutes.
Yes, if you trace the theological schisms recorded in those pages, it will lead you straight to their new geographic settlement. The theology literally dictated the migration.
That is amazing. And in the exact same way, the no-Hellers use these local association minutes to define their unique identity and track their physical movement. Marginalized communities use these exact same administrative structures for something even more fundamental.
Proving they existed at all.
Yes, proving they existed. This is where we examine the Black Wide Awake sources out of Wilson County, North Carolina during the Jim Crow era.
Such powerful records.
Because for African-American communities in the 1910s and 20s, official state and county records were deliberately negligent, highly dismissive, or completely non-existent.
The white-controlled government infrastructure was actively erasing their humanity. So they essentially created a parallel system of justice and governance through their church ledgers. The church book became the official historical record of their lives.
The Bethlehem Primitive Baptist Association perfectly illustrates this agency. It was formed in 1910 when 6 African-American churches made the bold decision to break away from the larger Radicue Association.
And the minutes explicitly record the reason for this split. They note that trouble arose because a member was being tried in a disorderly way.
So these 6 churches looked at an unfair process and said, we refuse to allow our people to be subjected to this.
Right.
They walked out and established their own governing body. In the segregated South in 1910, putting that demand for due process in writing and forming an independent institution is a profound act of self-governance and dignity.
It really is. And the meticulous nature of the records they kept afterward is just striking. You read about Elder Samuel Burston and Elder Wiley Barnes leading congregations like the Corner Line and New Hope churches.
The entry for Traveler's Rest is the one that really anchors this for me.
Yeah.
It's a tiny church. The minutes reflect that they only have 6 members in total, yet they proudly, painstakingly record that in the previous year they baptized 1 person and they received 2 others.
Because in a society that actively dehumanizes them and controls the county courthouse, they're keeping their own receipts.
Exactly. Every single soul is counted. They are creating a permanent document that says, we are here, we matter, we have order, we have structure, and we have value.
And these minutes also capture the spiritual survival strategy of the community. They didn't just record numbers, they recorded the specific scriptures that were preached.
Right.
In 1923, the records show Elder Barnes preaching at Traveler's Rest from Ezekiel chapter 36.
And looking at the context of Ezekiel 36, it's an incredibly potent choice. It speaks directly about God seeing his people made desolate, swallowed up on every side, and mocked by the surrounding nations. But then it promises ultimate restoration and vindication.
Yeah, Elder Barnes was not delivering a dry historical lecture on the Old Testament. He was speaking directly to the lived, daily reality of black sharecroppers and tenant farmers in 1923 North Carolina. He was offering a theological framework for their endurance.
That is not just a Bible study. That is a literal blueprint for community survival, preserved exclusively in the pages of a local administrative ledger.
It reveals how these documents functioned as far more than just bureaucratic red tape. They were testaments to human agency.
Absolutely. So taking a step back and looking at the full scope of our sources today, the journey from the massive dead ends of a national archive down into the hyperlocal records of New York, Appalachia, and North Carolina, it completely changes how we should look at history.
It really does. We constantly seek out pristine, centralized databases, but the truth of how people actually lived is always found in the margins.
Tracking a $5 gas bill in a freezing New York basement, unraveling the mystery of a 14-year disappearance, mapping a theological debate about the penalty box of earthly sin, or reading the meticulous baptism count of a 6-member Jim Crow-era congregation.
All of it.
These things give us a significantly clearer picture of historical migration and human endurance than a government map ever could.
Official records can only provide the dates and the borders. The local records capture the motivations, the interpersonal drama, the betrayals, and the deep networks of trust that actually built these communities.
So, for you listening, keep this in mind the next time you think about your own family's history. Your ancestors' biggest historical moments might not be stamped on a federal census form. The real story might be scrawled in the margins of a local church ledger, hiding just behind a routine letter of dismission.
It fundamentally redefines what we consider to be a historically valuable document.
It really does. Which leads to a final, somewhat provocative thought for you to ponder on your own. We've spent this deep dive looking back 150 years at the Fredonia ledgers and the primitive Baptist minutes, marveling at how much they reveal about everyday human nature.
Right.
But imagine historians 150 years from now, if they were to somehow compile our modern digital footprints, the messy group chats, the petty Venmo transaction notes, the endless complaints on neighborhood apps about parking and noise. Would those chaotic digital trails tell a more accurate, honest story of who we truly are?
Well, that's a wild thought.
Or would they simply be a high-tech version of the Fredonia Baptist Church ledgers? It seems the format changes, but the core human impulse to track our movements, squabble over bills, and fiercely document our own existence stays exactly the same. Keep digging into the local records of the past. You never know what muddy, beautiful reality you're going to uncover.
Thank you for listening to this installment of the Appalachian Historical Review. Remember to visit the digital archive at appalachiangenealogy.com. Join us next time for further study into the records and history of the Appalachian region.